Morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to New Knowledge Adventures. Today, we have a very special program in store for you. But first, a couple of words about NKA, also known as New Knowledge Adventures. Our program began over 15 years ago in partnership with Idaho State University in Pocatello. The volunteer program had some specific goals: affordable access, volunteer governance, volunteer instructors, and active engagement of the community and membership to provide a diverse, high quality educational experience and fun. In 2014, in partnership with AARP Idaho State University Meridian, and the Treasure Valley YMCA, NKA came to the Treasure Valley. And although the YMCA is no longer a partner, we continue to offer dynamic and compelling lifelong experiences to seniors. For the last 3 semesters, due to the pandemic, we have been an online program, but hope that in the future we can resume in-person classes and perhaps even offer a hybrid version of in-person and online classes. Once again, NKA is volunteer driven, and we are always looking for new faces to join our group. So if you are interested, I have placed Kathy McDougall's contact information in the chat box. Please contact her if you would like to volunteer or if you are interested in teaching a class. And now let me tell you a little bit about today's program. Jerry Finnegan has made some epic trips in recent years and has shared several of them with AARP classes. This trip began in 2010 with a movie that challenged the spirit and came together in 2018 with a 33-day emotional walk through Spain. The Camino de Santiago is a 500-mile ancient pilgrimage that begins at the French border, goes across Spain to the Basilica in Santiago de Compostela, the capital of Spain's Galicia region, and the alleged burial place of St. James the Apostle. This journey will challenge you physically, emotionally, and spiritually, but it's something more than a long walk. It is now my pleasure to present Jerry Finnegan, who will share this beautiful experience with us. Jerry?
Thank you, Lisa. Buen camino.
Gracias.
We will get started here right away. As Lisa said, we will be talking about the Camino de Santiago. And to begin with, I'll kind of show you a map of the Camino. Most people know only the portion of the Camino that I will be talking about today, but the Camino is actually a network of 7 well-defined pilgrimages across different parts of Spain and Portugal. And they tie in with routes that come from other parts of Western Europe. So it's really a entire network that we're talking about, but we will start out. And today we will be talking about the Way of St. James, which is the Camino, and the specific part of it is the Camino Frances. The shrine in Santiago held the remains of the Apostle St. James till the Moorish invasion in 997. The cathedral was torn down and rebuilt in the 12th century. So the Camino has been declared one of the 3 great pilgrimages of Christendom, along with the pilgrimages to Rome and Jerusalem. The route that we're going to be talking about is, as it says on the map here, the Camino Frances. So before I get into that, I would like to deal with some of the things that I felt were issues I had to deal with. Now, your list may be completely different because of your life's experience, But these are some of the things that I felt I needed to work out before I left. And the first one was international travel. I had done virtually no international travel at this point in my life, with the exception of 4 years in the United States Navy. I didn't even have a passport. And so that was one thing that I certainly had to get ahead of time. The other thing was schedules. We're talking about starting and going through many small villages along the way. And many of these, including our starting point, do not have an airport. They do not have train stations. And some of them are not even accessible by bus. So it became a challenge of sorts to figure out exactly how I was going to get to the starting point. The next thing was packing. What do you take? What do you don't take? Now, for me, this was less of a challenge because I have a lot of experience with backpacking in the mountains. So I already had a pretty good idea, a list of things that I wanted to make sure I took. The main difference here was the things that I didn't want to take. There is no need for taking a stove to cook your meals, no need to take a tent to sleep in. There are places to stay, places to eat all along the way. So those things weren't necessary. So you kind of look through your things that you're packing, taking as little weight as possible, but you want to make sure that everything that you will need is in your pack. The next thing was the money. I had never even heard of the euro at this point. When I was in the Navy, they didn't have the euro. So I had to get used to the exchange rate. But the biggest thing was the challenge of carrying, how much cash do I carry? The big issue is that many of these towns are very small. The businesses in these towns are very small, and they don't take credit cards in a lot of cases. So you have to take a certain amount of euros with you, but you didn't want to take too much because, you know, if you lost your wallet or, you know, something happened where you no longer had that cash, then you were really up a creek. So what I found worked out well for me was to carry a certain amount of euros with me. And then as I came to the big cities, I would look for a bank, look for an ATM, and convert more euros off of my credit card to carry more cash with me. So of the things on this page, probably the biggest challenge for me was the language barrier. I do not speak Spanish. And I thought in my mind that this was going to be a major drawback. And I have been told by friends who have been on the Camino that there will always be somebody there that can translate for you. Don't worry about it. Well, I took their advice and decided to go anyway. But my Spanish is still no better today than it was at that point. So I wanted to caution anybody that does speak Spanish, please make sure your microphone is muted so that everybody else doesn't hear you laughing when I slaughter the name of some of these places that we'll be talking about today, okay? Also, the physical and mental challenge for me, this was kind of a minor thing because I had already done a lot of backpacking. At the time I left for this trip. So I had done some conditioning, trying to get myself back into backpacking shape. But I think I underestimated the first challenge anyway. So we'll get into that here in just a minute. Things that you might want to know about living and traveling in Spain. First of all, the businesses close every afternoon about 5 o'clock, and we're talking almost all of the businesses. They then allow the employees to go home, have dinner with their families, and then everybody comes back to work at about 7 or 8 in the evening. So if you're the type of person that likes to go to a restaurant at 6 o'clock in the evening, enjoy a nice meal, you're not going to do that in Spain. The restaurants will be closed and you have to wait until they reopen in order to get a table. Another thing I found interesting was when you enter a building, you are on level 0. You were on the ground floor. You go up one flight of steps, you're then on the first floor. And that took a little bit of getting used to when you were pushing the buttons in the elevator. So you want to keep that in the back of your mind. The hotels and albergues in Spain will, in most cases, supply you with a towel if you want to take a shower. However, for whatever reason, they do not supply a washcloth. I found that kind of unusual. So if you're the type of person that likes to use a washcloth when you shower, take a Ziploc bag, put a washcloth in it, and carry it in your pack. Even if it's wet, it's not going to make any difference in the Ziploc bag. The rest of your bag will stay dry, but that will come in quite handy on a number of occasions, I'm sure. The Spanish word for bathroom is baños. I guarantee you're going to need to know that word. The Spanish word for breakfast is desayuno, and that came in handy quite a few times too. The next thing is, if you are the type of person that likes a nice cup of coffee in the morning, like I am, I always have my coffee handy. Well, in Spain, coffee is not a big deal like it is in the United States. So when you order, you will order a cafe Americano or cafe Americano grande. Even if you order the grande, you will probably end up with about a quarter to a half a cup of coffee. They just don't serve coffee like they do in the US. So the next thing is that the Spanish word for hello, of course, is hola. But the international salutation, regardless of what language is normally spoken on the Camino, is buen camino. Whether you're just greeting somebody or somebody is leaving, it's always buen camino. It's internationally understood, and you will be able to communicate with everybody if you simply say buen camino. The last thing on this list is Wi-Fi. Do not depend too much on Wi-Fi, because there are many places along the Camino where you will not have access to Wi-Fi. So if you're going to use your phone for a map, make sure you download your maps on your phone before you go, because you will not be able to access them in many locations. And the other thing I found a little bit funny was, because the I is pronounced as an E in Spanish, everybody in Europe refers to Wi-Fi as Wi-Fi. And it just kind of tickled my funny bone when I heard that the first time. But the biggest challenge is going to be the metric system. Most of us are not familiar with the metric system. The one part of it that you will need to know is that to convert kilometers to miles, you multiply by 0.6. It's not exact, but it'll give you an approximation for all practical purposes. The Camino is about 800 kilometers long. So if you multiply that in your head by 0.6, that translates into about a 480-mile journey, 485, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that's something that you will use on a regular basis, and you will use it because of the guidebook that you will be carrying. The guidebook lists all of the measurements between towns in kilometers. And so in order to figure out how many miles you have to go today, you multiply it by 0.6. The standard guidebook for English-speaking countries is the Pilgrim's Guide to the Camino de Santiago by John Brierley. Brierley does publish guidebooks for about 4 of the different routes on the Camino, so make sure you get the one for the Camino Frances, and you'll be in good shape. This book just has a wealth of information in it. You can rely on this book for a lot of things, but the one place where I did take issue with him was in it, he states that you must know the purpose of your Camino before you start. And I subscribe more to the off-quoted philosophy that your Camino will find you. As you walk along, you will discover what the true reason is that you're on this journey. My Camino originally began as an adventure and a physical challenge. And this started back in 2010 when I first saw the movie The Way with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. But while this was percolating in my mind, life happened. My wife of 39 years passed away very unexpectedly, and it really hit me hard. And so my purpose for my Camino kind of changed with that, in that this became a journey of remembrance and reflection. And so with that in mind, I began to make plans to finally do my Camino. So what I did at that point was made my reservations. I knew when I was going. And after that point, I decided to go to my 50-year high school reunion back in Wisconsin. And I met a young lady that I had known in the 8th grade. We fell instantly in love and got engaged and got married. And so now, again, the purpose of my Camino had changed. Now it became a journey, not so much of remembrance, but a journey of transition from being a grieving widower to being a newlywed. So as I say, the purpose of your Camino, you will find it as you go along, but chances are you will find it. So now my late wife, Betty, had done a lot of things during her life. One of those was she belonged to several groups at church. And one of those groups was the Rosary Makers. We are Catholic. And if you're not familiar with the Rosary, it's basically a counting device used during devotion by Catholics. And she had made a number of these. She had also collected a number of these during the house. And I collected about a dozen rosaries that I found stashed in various places. And I thought it would be a good way to keep her memory alive and spread her works really around the world, to take some of these rosaries with me and hand them out to people. It was going to happen, but I figured I would run into people and handing out a rosary would be appropriate. And by doing so, I would keep Betty's memory alive. So that was another subplot, if you will, of my Camino. So let's get started here. We've got a map of Spain. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see Santiago de Compostela. I don't pronounce it as well as Lisa did, but on the upper right-hand corner, you'll see just across the border in France, Saint Jean Pied de Port. And it is the official starting point of the Camino Frances. So in order to get there, like I said, this is a small town. It's about 2,000 people. There is no airport. There is no train station. So you will have to pretty much depend on bus travel in order to get there. Most people fly in either to Paris, Barcelona, or Madrid. I chose to fly into Madrid. I found it easier to find a flight from the US to Spain if I flew into Madrid. So from Madrid, then I plan to take the train to Pamplona in northeast Spain, and from there take the bus up and over the Pyrenees into France, and my final destination is Saint Jean. So that's what I did. I flew into Madrid, took the train to Pamplona, and on that train ride, I met a couple other pilgrims, several other pilgrims that were on their way to St. John, and a couple of us got together. So when we reached Pamplona, we decided that we would chip in and share a cab to get over to St. John instead of taking the bus. Now, it ended up costing us about the same because we were splitting the cab fee. It cost about the same as what the bus was going to cost, but it got us into St. John a couple hours earlier. And after a very long travel day, we were happy to get into St. John early. All told, if you take into account the time zone changes, our trip to St. John took about 36 hours. So it was a very long trip. So the sign on the left here is either the name of the hostel where I stayed the first night in St. John, or they're promoting the brand of toilet paper that they use in their toilets. I imagine it's probably the name of the hostel. So in fact, it did turn out to be a wonderful hostel in the historic district of St. John. It was built in the 16th century, and they process a lot of people through there. There are an abundant number of places to stay in St. John. So I had no reservations ahead of time. I had no reservations on any of this trip. I just basically took it one day at a time and let the Spirit move me to wherever I happened to end up that night. By the time I got a room at this hostel and laid down, I did crash heavily and had a real nice nap that night. So when you get a room in one of these albergues or the hostels or the hotels, depending on where you want to stay, you will stay in many cases in what they call the box. The box can be a room with anywhere from 2 to 24 or even 40 beds in it. There is no pretense whatsoever of privacy. There's no, in many cases, there are no doors on these rooms. You just go in, they assign you a bed. You will get a sheet on your mattress in most cases. And quite often you will get a pillow. And that's pretty much about it. The rest is up to you. So when you go in there, you just claim your bed and you're good for the night. So on the first morning when I woke up after spending the night in the box, I just felt completely disconnected. I could not concentrate on anything. I was just scatterbrained, and I almost panicked because I really did not feel ready to go. Now, I had spent years planning this trip in my mind, and I've had the experience with the backpacking, but I just, for some reason, did not feel comfortable starting out right away. So I made a decision, and I think for me, it was the right decision. I decided to take a down day the first day before I even started on the trail. I decided to take a down day. Just spend my time walking around town, getting used to talking to the people, dealing with the merchants, dealing with the money. I packed and unpacked my pack several times in order to arrange things in what I thought was an orderly fashion so I could find them when I needed them. The next step for me was to go up the road to the pilgrim's office. Now, there are pilgrim's offices all around Spain. This particular one, because of the popularity of the Camino Frances, handles about 60% of all of the people that hike the Camino de Santiago. Give you an example of what the scale is here. In 2018, in all of the pilgrims' offices around Spain, there was 327,000 people that registered to hike the Camino that year. So about 60% of those go through this office. If you have any need for maps or questions that need to be answered, this is the place to take care of that. These people are excellent. They take care of a lot of people, and they can take care of you and get you on the way. So once you get settled in there, you will want to register for your pilgrim's passport. And we'll get into this a little bit later on, but you want to make sure when you start out that you have your pilgrim's passport from the pilgrim's office in St. John. You will carry that with you and use it daily as you go along. The unofficial starting point for the Camino is this lovely bridge across the river with a Basque cathedral or church on the other side of the bridge. Beautiful cobblestone street coming down through the historic district. And like I said, this is the unofficial starting point for the Camino Frances. Once you are on the trail, in order to make sure you remain on the trail, you will follow a variety of different types of signs. And most of them, in one way or another, will incorporate the scallop shell. And there will be a lot of different forms that this will take. Quite often, it will be this blue sign in the middle of the page here. And this is a depiction of a scallop shell. If there is nothing else around it, if you go in the direction, if you follow from the end of the rays to the closed end of the scallop shell, that will point you in the direction that you need to watch most of the time. However, if there is anything else in conjunction with this, like the black and white arrow here or a yellow arrow, follow the arrow, because the signs aren't always placed in the direction that they should be. So absent anything else, follow the scallop shell in the right direction. If you have an arrow or some other means of determining what the direction is, that would be the direction to go. And I found that most often, the easiest way to find what direction to go is to look around and spot other pilgrims. And the other pilgrims will be easy to spot. They will have most of the time a walking staff or trekking poles. They will be wearing a backpack, and quite often they will have the scallop shell tied to their pack. So if you see a bunch of people going in one direction, chances are that's the direction you want also. So out of St. John, we begin to climb, and climb we will. We are going into the Pyrenees Mountains. The first 9 miles at least of the Camino is uphill. And this can be a real physical challenge. Now, if you are in good physical condition and walking long distances doesn't bother you, walking uphill doesn't bother you, you should have no problem the first day. You will be walking approximately 16 to 17 miles the first day in the mountains. And that can be a little overwhelming. And if you are not used to that, I would recommend that you call the Refuge de Orison and make a reservation. It's only about 5 miles up the hill, but after that 5 miles, there is nowhere to stay until you get all the way over to Roncesvalles on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees. So it's bail out there, make a reservation and bail out 5 miles in, spend the night, and then take off the next morning, or make it all the way to Roncesvalles. As we climb, the views are just incredible. If the weather is just incredible, like it was on my first day. Because I took a down day, the weather ended up being just wonderful on the day that I started. You can look back down in the valley, the mist was still laying in the valley. Sun was shining bright. It was warm, but not too warm. And it was just a delightful day. 2 days before I left, I talked to some people further down the trail, and I found out that it had rained. It was overcast the entire day. They got not a single picture the first day out. And 2 days after I left, it actually snowed. And this was in May. The people in St. John sent vehicles up into the mountains to bring the pilgrims back to St. John, so nobody was stranded in the snowstorm. I don't think they got a lot of snow, but they were very cautious and wanted to make sure everybody was okay. So as you walk along through these mountainous trails, it's really a cacophony of bells is the only way I can think to describe it. All of the animals up there, so that their owners could keep track of them, they all wear bells. And we're talking about the cows, the horses, the sheep, even in many cases, the dogs up there were wearing bells. So as you walk along, there was bells clanging everywhere. It was like a symphony orchestra playing for your grand entrance into the Camino. It was just wonderful. About 7 miles up the road takes a hard right, and there's a big grassy area where it's a nice place to sit down and rest your weary muscles. And over on the edge of this opening, you'll see there's a rock outcropping, and on the rock outcropping is a statue of the Virgin Mary. And I thought this would be an appropriate place to leave my first rosary in case somebody else coming along needed that rosary. It was there for the taking. After a nice rest, you continue on your way, climbing still, and you will come to a food truck out in the middle of nowhere on the edge of the road that has been there for so long it actually shows up on the map as a mobile food truck. And so it's a nice place to get a break, get something to drink, something to snack on, and then you're off again. A short distance past there, you will come to the high point of the Pyrenees and cross over. At that point, there is a fountain, and the fountain is good water. It's safe to drink that water. So that's something you can look forward to when you do get to the peak. Now, the guidebook said that there was a wooden structure just beyond this point that used to be the border. The crossing guards would stay at the border between France and Spain. Of course, when the European Union was formed, those borders fell for the most part. I did not see it anywhere, but I'm told that somewhere right into this vicinity is the actual border between France and Spain. I was a little disappointed. There was no sign saying you are now entering Spain. But anyway, going back to the fountain, these fountains you will find all the way across Spain. They are inspected regularly to make sure that the drinking water is safe. And if there's ever a problem with the results of one of those tests, they will put a sign out telling you not to drink the water. I chose to carry my own water bottle with me. That's just what I'm in the habit of doing. So you can do whatever you like. If you don't want to carry the weight of the water, you can stop at the fountains and get something to drink. So now we've made it up and over the Pyrenees Mountains. We have a long descent down into the town of Roncesvalles. At this point, we only have 470 easy miles to go. So you can relax the first night out in this monastery, which puts up a lot of people. It has 3 floors with a room on each floor that has 40 beds. So like I said, there's no pretense of privacy here. It is co-ed. You're assigned a bed, or you're assigned a room, I should say, and you go in, find an empty bed. You can spread your laundry out. You can do whatever you want to. And you just basically in a room. Now, there are men's and women's showers, so there will be privacy there, but the sleeping quarters, there was no privacy. The one thing that they ask you to do normally is to make sure when you get up in the morning, you remember that the other pilgrims that are in your room or your box, they are on a different schedule. Everybody gets up on their own and starts going whenever they feel like it. There's no taskmaster there to drive you in the morning. So they ask you to please not turn on a bunch of lights and don't make a bunch of noise so that you don't wake up the other people around you. In this particular case, they did that for you, so you didn't have to worry about it. They came in at 6 in the morning, turned the lights on, everybody got up, got ready to go, and was out of there by 8 so that they could start making these 40 beds in each of the 3 rooms and be ready for the pilgrims coming in the following day. Walking along, I come to the little town of Burjate. And this town is famous for a couple of reasons. It's a very old town, as are most of the places that you will come to. Burjate is famous for not only this before, but it has been rebuilt several times. It has actually burned down a couple of times, so they've had to rebuild it. But the current version of this was redone back in the 1800s. But this little town was the home of Ernest Hemingway when he lived in Spain back in 1923 as he was writing one of his books. And so it's famous for that. It's also famous for this church serving as a place for witch trials back in the 17th century. And there were several women that were condemned to be burned at the stake in the courtyard of this church. So a little sad piece of history, but history nonetheless. One thing you'll notice about most of these little towns is they existed long before the automobile, and therefore the streets through these towns are very narrow by modern standards. And you'll see there are no sidewalks on these streets. So you just want to be aware of your surroundings, beware of automobiles coming by, because the drivers don't let that slow them down at all. Okay, so you have to watch out for the drivers and make sure that you stay safe. So after I hiked most of the second day, I found myself again at a food truck out in the middle of nowhere on top of a mountain. I got done taking my break, I got up, looked around, saw a Camino sign pointed down the hill or down the mountain on this particular road. So I hiked and I hiked and I hiked. I finally came to this town. And when I got there, something didn't seem right. My guidebook said I was supposed to come into the town of Thubiri, and I found a sign at the edge of town that said Arrow, E-R-R-O. Found out Arrow is Spanish for mistake. And I guess I know where they got the name for this town, because it was a mistake. I had hiked down the wrong road about 1.5 miles down the mountainside. And I actually hiked all the way through this town to the far edge of town, did not see one single soul in this town. I have no idea why, but I got to the far edge of town. I figured out that I was in the wrong place, going in the wrong direction. I turned around and I saw this little traffic jam in the middle of the street behind me. And I stood and watched for a while, and I realized this was a 21st century sheep herder driving his sheep up through the middle of this town. Now he is in the car at the intersection, has his window rolled down, and he's yelling his commands to the sheep to keep them moving up the sidewalk in this street. So I really got a kick out of that. I thought it was pretty good. So then I walked back into town. I heard a bell ringing at the church. And I said, aha, there is somebody in this town. I walked back and I found a young lady that was taking the trash out. And I tried talking to her. She spoke no English. I spoke no Spanish. So we did a little pantomime, and finally convinced her that I was in the wrong town. I probably wasn't the first one she had met that was in the wrong town. And there are no taxis in these towns because these are very small cities or towns. They're not big cities. And so she turned around and had a friend that had an automobile that was willing to give me a ride up and over the mountain into Thubiri for a very reasonable fee. So I tipped him heavily, gave him more than what he was asking for, and thanked him very much for the ride. So I didn't have to walk up and over that mountain. It said in the guidebook, the calculated distance between Arrow and Thubiri would have taken me about 1.5 hours to walk that. So I was glad to come into town. He dropped me off at the first albergue that we found, and it was just a stroke of luck. This was just a beautiful place to stay. I really enjoyed it. They had a choice between semi-private rooms and a large room that had 6 or 8 beds in it. It was large enough for what I needed. Had these wonderful rooms. They served dinner in the evening, and there was a lounge. So when there was lights out, if you weren't ready to go to bed yet, you could go down in the lounge. You could read or write in your blog like I did. And the added bonus is that if you wanted, you could turn in your dirty laundry and they would do your laundry for you for a very nominal fee. And the next morning your laundry was ready. So it was really nice not have to deal with that myself. I had them do my laundry and I was all set to hit the road the next day. So the next day we get up and we're walking. It was overcast all day, a little bit of a drizzle here and there, but it was really nice to be walking on dirt again instead of pavement. That made it nice. The temperatures were nice, and it was just a real good day for walking along the Camino. There was a lot of people in this particular stretch. We didn't get stretched out very far between stopping points. So it was, however, a very good day on the Camino. About lunchtime, I came to this guy. He was the first of many unique pieces of art that I would spot along the way. And he was marking the Café La Parada de Zurian. And it was a nice little cafe, stopped there and had a real nice lunch. One of my concerns was I'm a pretty fussy eater. And I was a little bit worried about being able to find meat and potatoes type meals. I was afraid I was going to be forced to eat salads or something like that. Turned out that the people that eat the salads had difficulty finding good salads because everything is meat and potatoes in Spain. So I really enjoyed the food all the way across the country. that afternoon, as we're walking down the trail, I came to this delightful old farm. This was a 300-year-old sheep farm. It was still in the family of the people that built the farm in the first place. It was still in their family. And it was just a delight to see this. The artwork, I'll call it artwork, that went into building these stone buildings was just fantastic. And you'll see as we go through here, I was just amazed by some of the stonework that we saw. Continuing along, finally made it up and over a small hill and started the descent down into Pamplona alongside the main highway. Now, Pamplona is the largest town that we've come to so far. So it wasn't unexpected completely that we would see a little bit of graffiti. However, as we go along, I was surprised at how seldom we saw any graffiti, even in the large cities. The cities really looked good, and they took care of this type of thing on a regular basis. This, I believe, was political in nature. I don't know what it was all about, but we just ignored it, continued on past that. As we entered the east side of Pamplona, coming into the historic district, we went across the Puente Magdalena, I believe it's pronounced. And when I saw that, I thought, well, this is probably named for Mary Magdalene from the Bible. And I found out later, if my sources are correct, that Magdalena, they came up with the name of this bridge, but it was beautiful and I loved it. It was actually built in the 12th century to go across the Rio Arga, coming into Pamplona. These old bridges were everywhere, and you'll see as we go in love with these bridges. This one was in a mountain town further across Spain, connected the historic district to a much newer neighborhood. And then you get even further across Spain. Here's another one. These are both 12th century bridges. And it just amazed me that these bridges were still standing today and still being used daily. But they go from the historic district to the newer neighborhoods. You walk through newer neighborhoods and there's satellite dishes on the roofs. So it's really kind of a juxtaposition between the new and the old. And it made for some very photogenic occurrences. So by this time, the weary pilgrim has walked about 65 kilometers to Pamplona, which is about 40 miles. And we're entering the city that is the home of Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, where he told of the running of the bulls. Now, this occurs every July during the festival of San Fermin, who is the patron saint of Pamplona. During July, almost everybody wears red and white, which are the official colors of the festival. And if you want to, you are invited to go out and run with the bulls, if that's your thing. They do it every morning for the week from July 7th to July 14th. The public is invited. However, if you want to be a little bit safer, it is possible to rent a balcony above the chaos and stay safe and just watch what's going on below you. So the little picture in the left-hand side here is the Porto de Francia, where we enter the historic district of Pamplona. As I walked through the historic district, one albergue after the other had a sign out front saying "Completo," and I took that as not being a good sign. So when I finally ended up walking back out of the historic district and still had not found a place for the night, I decided I was going to stay in the first hotel I came to. Lucky for me, it happened to be a 5-star hotel. So brings me to the next point. One of the most interesting things to me about Pamplona and Spain in general was the attitude of the locals towards the pilgrims that wander constantly through their towns and cities. Now, picture this. I'm walking into a 5-star hotel carrying a large walking staff, wearing wet clothes. My hair is a mess, of course. I got this floppy old hat on. And I walk past the dining room where there's people in suits and long dresses preparing to eat. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get thrown out of here on my ear. And instead of that, they gave me a room, offered me complimentary fresh fruit and a bottle of water. And on top of that, they gave me a discount on the room because I was a pilgrim. So I thought that was just really unique. It was just, it was actually heartwarming for me to see how welcoming the people of Spain are to the pilgrims across their country. The next morning, I bumped into somebody I had met on the train between Madrid and Pamplona. So we were walking together, we were talking, and on two different occasions, we walked past where we should have crossed at an intersection to stay on the Camino. As we did, people stopped what they were doing and they came up to us, turned us around and pointed us back, got us back to where we needed to cross the road. And this happened on two occasions. And they watched and made sure that we got back onto the trail we were supposed to be on. So they were just extremely friendly to us. And it was just very heartwarming. Now, I've been to New York City and I've never been treated like that. So it spoke very well for the people of Pamplona. A little bit further down the road, I found that my shadow going across the field had a halo on it, and it followed my shadow all the way across the field. So I thought I'd take a picture of that. And then I came to some real artwork. This was on top of the Alto de Perdón, which is the Mount of Forgiveness. It is a metal silhouette piece of art. There's actually 12 figures altogether. And on the metal artwork inscribed in Spanish is the words, when translated, that say, where the path of the wind crosses with that of the stars. Now, these 12 figures, if looked at as a group, actually tell the history not only of the Camino, but of the popularity, the growing popularity of the Camino, because they become more densely packed as you go from left to right. But it was just a real nice idea for this work of art on top of this mountain. And it was in stark contrast to all the wind turbine generators on the surrounding hillsides. A little bit further along, we come to this 11th century bridge. It's called the Queen's Bridge. And back in the 11th century, the queen at the time in this particular area was Queen Muniodona, I believe it's pronounced. And she had this bridge built specifically for the pilgrims, so that they had a way to get across the bridge or get across the river safely by building this bridge. In the town of Manero, this is a very, well, it's a small town, but it's very typical of the towns that we go through. Has a church in the center. The Camino goes right past the church. So you can kind of see how these cities grew out from the Camino as they grew. Now, on the far side of town was a cemetery, a very old cemetery. And this is on the Calle Forzosa, I believe it's pronounced, which is the street of the inevitable. And I thought that was kind of cute. There was a plaque on this gate that I did not get into the photograph, and the passage that was on this plaque is at the top of the screen. If you read Spanish, you can read it there. But I wanted to tell you, it says, when translated, it says, I was once what you are, and you will be what I am. So I thought that was pretty specific for a cemetery. So anyway, we'll keep moving along here. 21 kilometers down past the Queen's Bridge, you come to the beautiful little town of Estea. And in this town, I found another real nice albergue to stay in. The river was beautiful. The weather was beautiful. And they pointed me in the direction. Now, this is a little bit larger city. It's about 17,000 people, I believe. And in the middle of town, if you walk down there, there was a restaurant that had a special menu just for the pilgrims. They would not sell these particular meals to anybody that was not a pilgrim. They would ask to see your passport as proof. And they gave you meals for a reduced price because of the fact that you were a pilgrim passing through their town. As we walked across northeastern Spain, we saw a lot of these fields of yellow flowers. They were just beautiful. They swayed in the breeze. So if you were up on a hillside, you could see everything in front of you was yellow, and you could actually see the wind blow through these fields as the flowers bent and then came back again. It was just absolutely beautiful. So I started asking around, and I found out that this plant is called rapeseed. And it has been found to have a number of very useful purposes for the oils that are extracted from it, but it has a marketing challenge. Nobody, especially in English-speaking countries, wanted to buy anything made from rapeseed. So there was a Canadian company that had figured out a process to extract the oils from this flower, and they found that it was a very low acid content oil that they were getting. It was very good for many different purposes. So they took the actual description of their product, Canadian oil low acid, and they reduced it to an acronym, and they call it canola. This is the flour that canola oil is made from. Continuing along the way now, we're in the town of Los Arcos, and like many other towns, at the center is a church. In front of the church is a plaza. Across the plaza are shops and cafes. So you can go in, buy your meal, take it out into the plaza, sit in the sun, enjoy the conversation with other pilgrims and the good food that's there for you to enjoy. The next day I was walking along the trail follows near this very busy divided highway. And I see the pilgrims as they have passed over the years many of them have taken sticks and woven them into the chain link fence and formed crosses. And this was long. I mean, this wasn't one small section. This went on for hundreds of yards. And it was rather unique form of makeshift art, if you will. Some of them had names attached to them, but many of them were just the cross itself. As we continue along, we come into the town of Viana, and in Viana, we come to this beautiful plaza right in front of a restaurant. Again, it was a good place to stop and have a lunch. And when you turn and look across the street from this plaza, you see this huge, huge cathedral. And it was so big and it was so close that it was impossible to get a picture, for me anyway, impossible to get a picture of the entire cathedral. So I settled for a picture just of the entryway to this church with this huge iron door and all of the artwork around the entryway. It was just beautiful. Now this was a cathedral that was built in 1507, and it was the original burial place of the controversial Italian-born Caesar Borgia, who was, I guess you'd call him a mercenary. He was didn't show a lot of mercy to his victims, but he was very influential in the conquering of different areas. He was the illegitimate son of the equally controversial Pope Alexander VI. And when Caesar's sinful debauchery became public, they had several instances of people writing and destroying basically his tomb inside the church. So the bishop came to investigate, found out why this was happening, and he had his body exhumed and buried beneath the cobbled pavement outside the church in unconsecrated ground so that it could be trampled on by men and beasts alike, is what the bishop said. Now, the locals still saw him as somewhat of a hero because of his military conquest. And so they petitioned the church over and over and over again to have him move back within the church. So the church finally came up with a compromise on the 11th of March in 2007. They finally, once again, exhumed his body and buried it within the church grounds, but not inside the church itself. And this was on the day before the 500th anniversary of his passing. So it took him a while to get that done. Inside the church, everywhere you look was artwork. The side altars were just emblazoned with gold and gemstones. Just unbelievable, the artwork in not just this cathedral and this church, but churches all across Europe, really, and specifically across Spain that we would come to. The amount of effort that went into the art inside these churches is just remarkable. We continue along to the town of Navarre, I believe it's pronounced. Established in 923. At one time, this little town was the capital of the La Rioja wine region of Spain. Now, I'm not a wine drinker, so I don't know, but I'm told that this region of Spain produces some world famous wines. And at one time, this was the capital city of that region. Just beyond it, we come to Santo Domingo de la Calzada. And in the 11th century, Dominic de la Calzada decided he wanted to do something for the pilgrims that were coming across Spain on their way to Santiago. So he built a bridge, then he built a hospital, then he built a hotel for the early pilgrims to stay in. Not satisfied at that point, he began construction on this cathedral. But in the meantime, before the cathedral was completed, he passed away. And eventually his good works and a couple miracles that took place got him canonized in the church, and he became a saint. And they buried him inside the cathedral that he had actually designed and started building. But one of those miracles was the miracle of the rooster and the chicken. And I wanted to tell you about this. This is kind of unique. The story goes that in the 14th century, an 18-year-old German named Huguenot was on a pilgrimage with his parents. A Spanish girl at the hostel where they were staying made some sexual advances towards young Huguenot, and young Huguenot, being a good boy, turned her down. When he rejected her, the angry girl decided she was going to get even. So she took a silver cup, hid it in the German's bag, and then informed the authorities that the youth had taken it. So young Huguenot was put on trial, convicted, and sentenced to die on the gallows. The parents sadly decided that they were going to go and see their son's body on the gallows. He was still hanging there, but as they walked into the plaza, they heard their son's voice, and their son's voice told them that Saint Dominic had saved his life. His parents were so enthralled by this that they quickly went to Santiago de Compostela to see the magistrate. They told the magistrate about the fact that they had heard their son's voice, even though he was hanging on the gallows. Well, the magistrate, who was in the middle of eating his dinner at the time, was a little upset that they had interrupted him. So he said, "Your son is as alive as this rooster and chicken that I was feasting on before you interrupted me." At that moment, the two birds jumped up from the plate and began to sing and crow happily. So to this day, because of this story, the church keeps a rooster and a chicken out behind the church. And believe me, I stayed in the hostel next door. You can hear every morning, you hear the rooster and the chicken welcoming the new days. So that is the miracle of the rooster and the chicken. Continuing along the way, we come to this mass burial site. Actually, this is a monument nearby, the mass burial site of approximately 300 men that were snatched from their homes, taken into the countryside, and executed by Francisco Franco at the beginning of the Spanish Revolution in 1936. Very solemn place, but next to it is a picnic area where the descendants of these people can come and enjoy a picnic near their loved ones. This was just as random can be, in the middle of a cow pasture. There was cows out roaming around this pasture. Somebody had built this rock spiral in the middle of nowhere. And this kind of breaks up the journey as you go along. You come across these things, you can't believe what you're seeing. Now we're in the large city of Burgos, one of the biggest cities that we would come to on the French way. The large Gothic style cathedral in Burgos began construction in the year 1221, and they worked on this for nearly a century before it became essentially complete. About 200 years later, they decided to add some embellishments. And during the 15th and 16th centuries especially, there was a lot of additions put on. The most recent was even in the 18th century. So this cathedral is just huge beyond description. It's, I believe, the third largest cathedral in Spain. It is also the home of the tomb that holds the remains of the Spanish folk hero El Cid and his wife. Inside, again, inside the Basilica, there are multiple side altars and chapels, each just as ornate as the next. The cathedral is the third largest one in Spain and the only Spanish cathedral listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site on its own merit. And again, the artwork is just, on the north wall of the cathedral is the golden stairs, which are no longer used. However, when they were used, you see there's a set of doors at the top of the stairway. Those doors actually open to the west end of the cathedral was the original door. And above the original door is a unique piece of glass artwork that features the Star of David. Kind of unusual thing for a Catholic church, but I thought that was kind of neat. So I spent the night several blocks up the street from the cathedral, walking back and forth to take pictures. Then again, for dinner that night, I ate across the street from the cathedral. I had been walking with somebody as we approached Burgos that had been there before, and she recommended that I get a hotel room that overlooked the cathedral. Well, I didn't want to venture too far off of the Camino. And so I got a hotel. It was a very nice hotel. And we'll talk about that in just a minute here. But the next morning, after doing all this walking back and forth to the cathedral to take pictures, I got up, packed up, and as I went out into the street, I started following the signs again. The Camino actually turned the corner a block beyond where I was staying and came right directly past the cathedral. So I could have stayed, as she had suggested, in a hotel that overlooked the cathedral. I would recommend that you do so if you ever go to Burgos. Going back to the hotel, this was the first of a number of unusual shower arrangements that I saw. This kind of became a subtext to my Camino. It was just unbelievable. These showers did not completely surround you. So there was nothing to keep the water from going on the floor. As I stood in the shower, I turned the water on. The shower head was on a flexible hose at the top of the pole that you can barely see on the right-hand side there. And as I turned the water on, the shower head twisted around and shot water up and over the glass onto the floor. So I quickly corrected that. But still in the process of taking a shower, there was water coming out past me. I'm quite tall, so the shower head was up high. And it came out past me and got onto the floor. By the time I got done, I had this lake on the floor, and it was a wooden floor in this old hotel I was staying in. So I really felt bad about it. I took as many towels as I could and dried everything up as soon as I saw what had happened, but made quite a mess there. In fact, the next morning when I went to leave, the elevator was down. And as I walked past it, I see that they were bringing towels up, probably to the people in the room below me, so they could clean up the mess that was made in their room. So I hope it wasn't my fault, but I suspect it might have been. So we have hiked the first third of the Camino. It is now behind us. It has been a physical challenge, walking long distances day after day while figuring out what you forgot to bring or what you brought and you wish you no longer had with you, how to do the laundry, what your daily routine was. The next third of the Camino is referred to as the meseta, or the plateau. and it will present its own mental challenge. So the next third of the Camino will be a mental issue. Your body kind of goes on autopilot, and it really doesn't make any difference because there isn't a lot to obstruct your way. You just go on autopilot and it frees your mind to explore, whether it be escaping from something, coming to terms with your demons, embracing your life's purpose, a religious epiphany, it doesn't matter. It's all there on the Meseta waiting for you to discover. Also, you will discover that the rain in Spain does fall in the plains, and that frequently leads to some very picturesque rainbows. So this picture is very typical of the Meseta. It is very flat. It's not quite as flat as it appears from a distance because the creases that go across the Meseta actually are quite deep and in many cases contain an entire town. So you will periodically come to towns that show on the map, even though it looks like it's flat forever and ever. The weather on the Meseta can be anything from suffering hot to finger nipping cold. It can be bone drying drought or raining for days. Your mind can wander endlessly, yet it seldom makes any difference as the kilometers pass underfoot because you are in your own mind, you have your own thoughts. You're either talking to somebody else, or if you're by yourself, it gives you plenty of time to think through and find your purpose on the Camino. That is, unless you are one of those people that are suffering from blisters, in which case you will have something else to think about. Many warn that you will dislike the Meseta, but I found it an experience to be cherished. My thoughts were leaning steeply towards the philosophical in this region, and I relished the revelations that passed through my mind. There was a piece of my stride that I hadn't known for years since my wife had passed away, really, and maybe even before that. But it was just a very peaceful experience, and I loved it. I spent the night in Carrion de los Condes at this 13th century monastery that had been converted to become a very large albergue. And I got a kick out of this. The gentleman that showed me to my room, I got a private room for the night. The gentleman that showed me to my room walked in, he walked over to the shower and pointed inside the shower. He says, "The water goes here. Yes, water here." Then he took a step back and pointed to the floor outside the shower. And he says, "No water here, no." And I had to laugh to myself because I wondered if maybe the hotel owner in Burgos had called ahead and told him I was on my way and maybe described me and said that I was coming and I was going to make a big mess on his floor. But anyway, I got a big kick out of that. So now we're nearing the town of Sahagún, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I cannot figure out how to pronounce it. As you come into the south side of town, the road, or the trail, I should say, splits. One part of it goes directly into town alongside the highway. The town is right there, you can see it. But there's also a sign telling you to cross the highway and walk across this field. So I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I followed the sign, went probably half a kilometer down through this field, and I came to this very ancient bridge. It's a 12th century bridge that crosses over a little creek. There's a little prayer chapel on the other side. And if you turn to the left coming off the bridge, you see this interesting pair of statues. This marks the official midpoint of the original Camino. Now, if you went directly into Sahagún, you would not see this. So that was the reason they rerouted you so that you could take this in before you headed back and went into town. The statue on the right here, Castilla y León, and he was the one who reestablished the ancient Camino route in the 11th century after the Moors had been defeated. The statue on the left is Bernardo de Ciudad, and he was the founder of the nearby town Now we are halfway across the Camino. And I found it advantageous for me as I went along and I came to these different towns. I would walk through the town and try to find a place to stay on the far side of town. And I found this was working very well because then when I got up in the morning, I was instantly out hiking in the countryside again, and I didn't have to negotiate city streets when people were coming to work and there was a lot of foot traffic. So I found this had been working quite well. Well, when I got to Sahagún, I walked all the way through town. I walked right past a hotel at the edge of town and walked all the way through. As I came to the far side of town, I noticed that I could not find any other hotels. So I stopped and asked the shop owner, who indicated with a finger that there was no place to stay in town and that I was going to have to backtrack through the entire town back to where I had started and take that first hotel I had spotted on the edge of town. Now, the reason I needed a hotel this particular night was this was Memorial Weekend and it was Sunday of Memorial Weekend. Now, I've got a tradition, a personal tradition, that on Memorial Weekend, I have either watched, listened to, or attended the Indianapolis 500 for over 60 years. And I didn't want that string to break simply because I was halfway around the world. So I wanted a place that either had good TV where I could find the race on TV somewhere, or at least good Wi-Fi so that I could stream it and watch it. And that's what I ended up doing. Had a very nice meal in the restaurant. They put up with me sitting there for 3 hours watching the Indy 500 on my computer and or my iPad, and had a good time. And then the next morning, I got up and walked again, but not before I enjoyed the view from my hotel room. But I want to add quickly that the view was really nice if you were laying in bed. It was very peaceful. If you actually stood up and looked out the window, the view wasn't quite what it looked like when you were laying down. So I spent a lot of time laying down when I was in the room, so I didn't have to look across the street. So the next day I get up and I'm walking out of town. I walk past this old monastery. This actually was constructed in the year 904, so very old monastery, but it has been destroyed several times throughout its history by fire and invasion, actually. The arch in the left of center here was built in 1662 to replace part of the facade that surrounded the original structure. So most of the building on the right is much newer than that, but the site itself has been around since 904. On the very edge of town, we cross over the Puente Canto, over the Rio Sea river. And this old stone bridge has been around for a long time also. It is a 16th century bridge, but it's built on the site of an old Roman bridge. This also has been rebuilt several times through its history, most notably in 1880 when they used some of the stones that came off of the monastery we were just looking at to reinforce the stones on the bridge. So I walk across the bridge, and here on the other side of the bridge is this beautiful site. Now, keep in mind, this is actually Memorial Day itself, and I come across this huge field full of poppies. What could be more appropriate? The poppy, of course, being the international symbol of those who have fought and lost their lives fighting in wars for their country. But on Memorial Day, what more could you ask for? It was just extremely timely. So as I'm walking along, I noticed that there have been a number of improvements made along the Camino. They have been very adamant about making things comfortable and safe for the pilgrims. There's a lot of rivers and creeks that you have to cross. Many, like this one, have new bridges going across them. I found this one kind of unique because we're walking across this new bridge, whereas the automobiles are still driving on a bridge that was built in the 12th century. This is the Puente Ingente, or Ingente, excuse me, pronounce that correctly. In the background, the significance of this bridge is the fact that it has 20 arches. It is one of the longest bridges in all of Spain. Another example where there's a brand new bridge, just looked like it had just been put in the year before, going across a super highway. You notice that the cars have one narrow lane of traffic for going in each direction. And the pilgrims have this big wide lane. It's even wider than the lane for the cars, but it is spaced off and has the stanchions there to keep the pilgrims safe from the cars that are zipping by across this bridge. And it's just another example of how well they protect the pilgrims on their pilgrimage. So now we come in another 54 kilometers to the town of Leon, the capital city of the autonomous region of Castile and Leon. It is home to numerous churches and cathedrals. I found it interesting that the guidebook suggested taking a bus into, then back out of Leon and staying somewhere else. Then the guidebook turned very quickly to being judgmental about people who were judgmental about people who took the bus. And so I thought that was kind of a unique turn of events in the guidebook. But I saw nothing wrong with trekking through Leon. It's a large city. It's probably 150,000 people or so. So it takes a while to walk through it. But everywhere you go in Leon, there's something to look at. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. Just coming into town, I found this lion and I wanted to take a picture of this lion. So I stopped, got my phone out, and I was getting it ready to take a picture, and a car pulled up on the street right alongside me. The guy hops out, leaves his car running in the street, blocking traffic, and he comes over and he insists that he take my picture. And I was running through the back of my mind and saying, is he going to take my phone and jump in his car and take off? But I trusted him. And he took this nice picture of me standing next to the lion. He told me 3 or 4 times, Leon, lion, Leon, the lion. And so he made sure I understood that. And then he gave me my phone back, hopped in his car, and he took off. I had no idea who he was, but just another friendly Spaniard who wanted to take my picture as I hiked through his town. Of the many cathedrals in Leon, perhaps the most famous is the Santa Maria de Leon Cathedral. Beautiful, beautiful and huge structure. And if it isn't the most famous one in town, then perhaps it is the Basilica de San Isidoro, which is actually a 10th century cathedral. It has a museum on the grounds. The museum has in it a 7th century Latin transcription of the Bible. So we're talking pretty old stuff here. The city parks are a fine place to sit, share a bench with some of the locals. This gentleman sat next to me reading his paper, and he didn't even mind me intruding on his daily routine. He just sat there and I did my thing, he did his thing, and we parted ways as good friends. We'll be friends for life. On the way out of town was another one of these stone bridges that I just fall in love with every time I see them. And I think I mentioned this before. The thing that intrigues me about these is not only the craftsmanship that went into building it, but the fact that these bridges are still standing. They appear to be in their original form. I don't know if they are or not. They may very well have been repaired repeatedly, but they appear to be in their original form, and they're used daily. And it just fascinates me. Another thing that fascinated me was right in this big plaza on the right-hand side here is the city hall and the police station. But this building just stood out here. And it was originally built in the 19th century, back in the 1800s, as a house for a fabrics manufacturing company. It was then converted to be the headquarters of a local savings and loan. And today it is a museum dedicated to Spanish art of the 19th and 20th centuries. And it also features the designer of this building, a man named Antoni Guadi, who apparently has a worldwide reputation for being a fine architect and designer. He has 7 of the buildings that he designed and built that are designated by UNESCO as World Heritage Sites, 7 of them. So that's just incredible. We'll see another one here in a couple more towns. So after leaving Leon, strolling down the Camino, and I come to this couple that was walking along holding hands, and I just love this. Being a newlywed, my wife and I enjoy walking down the sidewalk holding hands all the time, and we enjoy seeing other people that do the same. So I had to stop them and talk to them. It was a little difficult talking because they didn't speak any English. And so we talked back and forth with a series of gestures and pantomime. And I asked them why they hiked the Camino. And they were just so happy and smiling. And they said they walk the Camino because they can. They are recently retired and they are just enjoying life. And what more can you ask out of life than that? Have somebody that you love walk hand in hand with you through life. Short distance after I met that couple, in fact, they were still with me as we approached this, I came to this bridge and I see this big field on the other side. And the gentleman explained to me through the greatest pantomime that this was the site of a jousting festival every year. And what happens is on the other side of town, or on the other side of the bridge, is the town of Hospital de Orbego. So I probably slaughtered that, but that was the name of the town. It's basically built around a hospital. And I found out that the bridge is called Paso An Rosso, and it has a story that goes back a long way. Back in 1434, a knight that was passing with his crew, passing through the area, settled in this field, and he and his companions, with permission from the king, threw down the gauntlet and challenged any knight that came across his bridge to a joust. And depending on which version of the story you hear, it was either because of the fact that he had been jilted by his true love, or because he wanted to prove his worthiness for the devotion he had to his true love. Anyway, they swore that they would break 300 lances before they moved on. Again, depending on which version you believe, after taking on many of the knights who traveled with the pilgrims on the Camino in those days, they either were successful or, according to a firsthand account recorded in Libro del Paso An Rosso, after 166 jousts, they were so injured and banged up that they self-proclaimed the challenge complete. They then made their own pilgrimage to Santiago to show they had demonstrated their honor worthiness. This whole event is referred to in the book Don Quixote, the Man from La Mancha. No doubt because of all the jousting, a hospital was established along the river by the Knights of St. John just on the other side of the bridge, giving the town its unusual name. This, if it looks familiar, is another building by Antoni Gaudí. It was actually originally the Episcopal Palace in Astoria, and it burned down back in the 1800s. It was originally a 15th century building. The Roman Catholic bishop thought it was such a shame that this building had burned down that he called a friend of his, who happened to be Antoni Gaudí, and requested that he redesign and rebuild this building. Gaudí was busy with another project in Barcelona, but he began construction right away with never having seen the site. He began building this building that he had designed for this site. Just around the corner from it is the Cathedral of Santa Maria de Astorga. Construction on this 15th century Gothic cathedral was begun in 1471 within the walls of an 11th century Romanesque structure. Construction and additions continue for the next 250 years with the addition of various architectural styles such as neoclassic, Baroque, and Renaissance. This immaculate stonework was among the oldest I saw anywhere on the Camino. It dated back to the days of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. And just look at the incredible detail in this stone and think about the fact that this is, what, 2,000 years old? It's just unbelievable. This, as you enter the town plaza in Astoria, you will find this has to be one of the most elaborate city halls you will find anywhere. Just unbelievable. In 1645, construction was started on this building, and back in the 18th century, they added the belfry with a working pair of marigatos that come out and strike the bell every hour. So now we're in Astoria. We have completed about the first 2/3 of the Camino. We found the first to be a physical challenge, the next third to be a mental challenge. The final third of this journey for many is a spiritual journey, the culmination of a newly formulated philosophy, or perhaps the reaffirming of that which we had rediscovered while walking the Meseta. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with but a single step, and step you must, one after the other, with each step drawing you closer to your goal. I don't know if this is from an ancient philosopher or a modern day pilgrim. I have no idea. I looked for the quote, could not find it anywhere online, but it kind of makes you think. It says, life is a movement that, like a march, follows a course. While our paths may seem antagonistic, the fact remains that they are all turning towards a similar direction. Every particle of life is necessarily moving toward the better. So let us rejoice and heal our feet, because there is hope and the road is long. I thought that was pretty good. And we've got some things that are a little bit newer, perhaps. This one by Voltaire in the 18th century says, when translated, I've decided to be happy because it is good for my health. And I thought I got a big kick out of that. It was in a restaurant. And this one is no doubt much newer. It looks like it just came from the gift shop around the corner. The one on the left, the other one, let the wisdom of uncertainty guide you. I thought was a pretty good philosophy also. But of all the things that I saw along the way, the one that I really took to heart was this one. This was one of my favorites. It's a memorial marking the demise of a young Catholic altar boy from Morriston, Wales. He was with a group of about 20 fellow students 9 days into their cycling pilgrimage when he succumbed to an undiagnosed heart ailment. His family has established a medical outreach program in the Philippines for the detection of cardiac problems in children. So in a very tangible way, Michael's Camino has extended beyond his singular path in life. All across Spain, we've spotted philosophical tidbits here and there to feed your mind. Chances are we've assembled some of these thoughts in meaningful ways in our own mind. But for me, the story was in the rocks and the stones. Take, for example, this intricate design. This just blew my mind. There are stones slanting from 5 different directions into a common point, and from there down the hill for drainage. Now, it was raining the day that I saw this. I took this picture. But even with all of the different angles involved here and all the different size stones that had to be used, there was no puddle anywhere. This laid perfectly for the drainage of this particular area. And it just blew my mind that they could be that precise with the placement of these stones. Much of the stonework was assembled by ancient craftsmen. This stone wall was assembled for function, and the spaces filled with appropriately sized pieces for stability. Like these stones, people come in all sizes and shapes, and each is unique. When we pull together, we can all find purpose in life, be it to serve, like the keystone in an arch, or to fit perfectly among our neighbors to fill gaps and provide support for the others. These self-assembled works of art become more apparent as we proceed. Every rock, every stone is unique and has a story attached. If We pause long enough to listen. Each of us has burdens that we carry in life also. There are as many burdens as there are stones, every size, shape, and color. In a very real way, the stones represent the burdens that we carry with us on our personal journeys. One of the high points of many a Camino, both literally and figuratively, is the Cruz de Ferro, or the Iron Cross. According to custom, each pilgrim is invited to bring with them a stone from their homeland, symbolic of the burden they carry in life, be they sins, addictions, worries, or the loss of a loved one. As the pilgrim places the burden on the pile at the foot of the Iron Cross, they let go of that burden, allowing the universal soul to assist them in carrying their load, and simultaneously freeing their hands to help others carry their load in much the same way that each stone in a wall is supported by the other stones around it. It was here that I placed the rosary that we saw earlier, along with my stone. Now, in reflecting on my Camino up to this point, I could see the parallels to the grief process that I was trying to work my way through. The Pyrenees were the opening phase, like the loss of a loved one. They were extremely difficult. The physical act of moving forward seemed at times impossible, like severe leg cramps. You don't know how you can move past this obstacle or deal with the pain. It's just so constant. Once you're able to, again, advance, the next obstacles are mental. How long can I continue this? You ask yourself, am I strong enough to continue this? Is there no end to the pain? Working your way through the mental challenges seems daunting, but by taking the necessary steps each day, facing the challenges as they arrive, we eventually reach a point where we can see beyond the grief, beyond the pain, and look to the horizon. Like Annie says in the song, the sun will come out tomorrow, but you have to go outside to see it. It had been a couple of days of clouds and rain by the time I had reached the Cruz de Ferro. I spent about 45 minutes there. Then, as I picked up my pack to leave, I found myself asking what my future holds. Am I worthy of whatever is ahead of me? In my case, I was wondering if after 3.5 years of grieving, had I done enough to deserve joy and happiness again as a newlywed? What would Betty say? Well, as it turned out, I didn't have to wait long for the answer. As I picked up my pack to leave, the sun came out. I hadn't seen the sun in a couple of days, and it was just my way of Betty telling me that everything was going to be okay and the future looked good. And if that wasn't a strong enough message, just not too far from there, I came to this on the pavement. It said, Betty loves you. Approximately 10 kilometers past Cruz de Ferro, after walking on some very tricky and potentially slippery rocks, I came to one of my favorite mountain villages of all the ones that I saw along the way, El Acebo de San Miguel. Most of the village's structures line the Camino as it makes its way through this tiny town. I got a hotel room here, and lucky for me, it had a balcony overlooking the main street through town. I took this picture, and I don't know what it was about this. It looked like something off of a calendar. It was just so perfect. And you can tell by looking at this street, this town's been around a lot longer than the automobile has, because there's no way that they built this with automobiles in mind. It is too narrow. There are no sidewalks, but it was just absolutely perfect. Another thing that I saw a lot of as I walked along was old church cemeteries. Some of them are very old and even landlocked, so they can't expand. So the way they get around that is they set up a crypt for each of the families in these small communities. And when a loved one dies, it is added to the remains of their ancestors, and they can still go there and worship or visit their loved ones all in the same place. It seemed at times, most of the time actually, that everything we were seeing was old. This chestnut tree, according to a nearby sign, has been around for over 800 years, meaning it has stood there and seen virtually every pilgrim that has ever walked the Camino Frances. Who knows? Maybe it was planted by an early pilgrim, maybe Johnny Chestnut Seed. Continuing along through the autonomous region of Castile y Leon, come to the huge fortress in the city of Ponferrada, which was founded by the Knights Templar in the 12th century. It sits high above the city and features a drawbridge over a moat. The moat has long since dried up and the drawbridge has been reinforced with metal, but is still just a wonderful testament of this 12th century castle that was built for the Knights Templar. When we're talking about favorite mountain towns, if this one, well, this one's definitely in the top 2 or 3 for me. This picture was taken again from my hotel room, overlooking the town square in Villafranca del Bierzo, which means the French town of the Bierzo region. The town was settled in 791 and was established as a stop for pilgrims on the Camino during the 19th century, or I'm sorry, 9th century. In 1070, a monastery was established here among a community of French pilgrims, thus giving the town its unusual name. By the way, the little restaurant on the right-hand side, right there underneath that black awning, had Ben and Jerry's ice cream. It was awesome. Loved it. Now, you may have noticed that a lot of these pictures are taken from hotel rooms. I had, since about halfway, all along the way, I have been talking to my new bride, Alicia, and each night I would talk to her when I had a Wi-Fi signal and I could. We would do video chats. And she had begun to take pity on me. So what she did is we talked each night. I would tell her where I wanted to make it to the next day. She would go online and make a reservation for me in a hotel instead of hoping that I could find a bed in an albergue. Now, I've been told that you can almost always find a bed in an albergue if you travel that way, but she decided that she wanted to put me up in a hotel room each night. They were very inexpensive. It didn't cost an arm and a leg to stay in them. So it was nice to have a private bath and just a good way to relax at night. And it gave me a way to talk in private to my new bride. So now about 20 kilometers west of Villafranca, the Camino leaves the main highway and turns towards one of the longest climbs that you will have on the entire Camino. I spent the night in the town of Las Herrerias at the bottom of this mountain, knowing that the next day I was going to begin a climb of nearly a half a vertical mile toward the town of Hostel. The next day, it was highly overcast. The sun hardly shined at all. But as I got up out of the mist of the valleys and before I got into the clouds, I did have some nice views of the landscape surrounding the area. I don't know where those high bridges went that I had in the previous picture. I figured I was going to be walking right underneath them, and I don't remember seeing them at all the next day. So it might have been that they were up in the clouds. I don't know, but never did see them again. Anyway, as I walked along, the sun came out very, very briefly, just as I had gotten up to the point where I was beginning to enter the clouds. Gave me a nice panoramic view of the surrounding countryside, to see all the hills and mountains off in the distance. It was really, really beautiful. And then I turned, climbed just a little bit more, and first the pilgrims and then the trail itself disappeared into the clouds. And it became actually kind of spooky. You'd be walking along and all of a sudden you would notice something up ahead moved, and you'd walk a little bit further and find out it was another pilgrim on the trail in front of you. So it was a very surrealistic looking trek that day. did make for some nice pictures, though I don't know, this one's very simple, but I kind of like the layout of the photograph. When I got to a place called Alto do San Roque, I found this delightful statue. I was not expecting this, but when I got up there, there was fog everywhere. The only thing that you could see instead of the surrounding countryside was just this statue. Luckily, there was another pilgrim there at the same time, and he volunteered to take a picture of me next to this statue. I love this picture. This has kind of become the icon of my Camino and one of the favorites of my family. So the next morning when I got up and started walking, the mist had almost completely lifted from the valleys. The clouds had cleared to a certain extent and just had a wonderful, wonderful sunrise welcoming the next day as I entered Galicia. Like Lisa mentioned during the introduction, we were passing at this point from Castilla y León into Galicia, which is the home autonomous region that contains Santiago de Compostela. It is at this point a mere 100 miles away. So you've almost made it. If we hang in there, we'll make it the rest of the way and we won't have any blisters by the time I'm done with this presentation. Although the distance may sound daunting, by this time most pilgrims have changed their focus more to the surroundings and their fellow peregrinos than on the distance to go to the final goal. That is, except for those people that are fighting the blisters every day. So over this last portion of the Camino, we're coming to more and more towns as it becomes more and more civilized, I guess, or more and more modern. And you begin to notice the artwork. And my mind went back over the course of the entire 480 miles. And I began to think about all the artwork I saw. Like some of these two-dimensional metal pieces were really unique and really a joy to see. And then, of course, there was the statues. There was many, many statues along the way. Every town seemed to have its artwork on display. And these statues just were everywhere, whether they be a historical figure or just a figment of somebody's imagination, or maybe a representation of pilgrims of old. Some of the artwork that we saw was just whimsical is the only way to really describe it, like these insects that were on the playground at this particular place. Or speaking of playgrounds, this was the playground of an elementary school that I hiked past. And I have no idea what the significance of the pattern is, if there is any significance, or if they were just put there for some unknown reason. But I thought that looked pretty cool. A nice way to decorate your playground. And of course, there were the murals. Some of them were newer and very good condition. Some represented towns, some represented ideas. This is an older 19th century mural that was alongside of a cathedral in one of the cities that we hiked through. And then, of course, there were those that were just advertisements for the albergues, trying to attract the pilgrims as they came into a town and get them to go to their albergue. So now we come to Sarria. Sarria is one of the key points on the Camino. It is a town of about 15,000 people. When you get to Santiago, in order to get a Compostela, which is basically a certificate of completion for the pilgrimage, you need to meet a couple of requirements. One of those requirements is that you walked the last final 100 kilometers, or that you biked the final 200 kilometers of the way. In order to document this, you had received that pilgrim's passport way back when you checked in at the pilgrim's office at the beginning of your trek. And this is what the pilgrim's passport looks like. Every time you stop, either at a restaurant or an albergue to check in, even the hotels, they have a unique stamp that they will put on your pilgrim's passport. And they will stamp it, they will date it. In many cases, they'll sign it so that you have proof of the places that you have gone. This passport, when you turn it in Santiago, needs to be stamped at least twice for each day that it took you to complete the final 100 kilometers of your Camino. Because Sarria is almost exactly 100 kilometers away from Santiago, it is the nearest starting point for a Peregrino to travel on the Camino and still be able to receive their Compostela at the end. I should explain, you get to Compostela, which is a real nice certificate in Latin. It has your name in Latin. And you will receive that if you declare at the end that you did this as a religious pilgrimage. If you did not, or you don't want to declare it as a religious pilgrimage, you can still get a distance certificate that shows the distance that you walked from wherever you started your Camino. So in Sarria, as you enter town, you see this wonderful 4-section mural as you enter town. The depiction on the picture at the lower right of the gentleman is a Camino icon known as Zapatones. And if we have time at the end, I will tell you his story. But for now, let me just say, when I reached this point, I had been walking with a German pilgrim. When we got to this point, he insisted that I go over and stand next to the picture of Zapatones and pose there. While I was standing there, no fewer than 6 other people came along and took my picture. So apparently they thought Zapatones and I looked a lot alike. I had also hiked with some people in a larger group that had been in text contact with each other as they went across the Camino, and they have been tracking my progress. Each night they would text back and forth whether or not somebody in the group had spotted me. And it turned out it was because they thought I looked like Dumbledore from the Harry Potter movies. So one way or another, it was not the last photo that I was asked to pose for. Just outside of Sarria, you come to this all-important marker. This marks 100 kilometers to Santiago. This marker is probably the most photographed marker in all of Spain. Everybody wants a picture of this. The marker, in addition to the ever-increasing number of pilgrims on the street, in the restaurants, and even signing into the albergues, makes you very aware of the fact that your journey is coming to an end. Eastern Spain features the Rioja wine region. In Western Spain, it's more about the olive farms. I believe this is an olive orchard, and I believe this is a much older olive orchard. If somebody watching this knows that these trees are not olive trees, I would appreciate if you shoot a little chat off to Lisa and let her know what they are. As far as I know, this is an old olive orchard. So now we're approaching Santiago. Your first view is from a place called Capilla de San Marcos. It's a hill overlooking the city of Santiago. There is a large monument there to a 1989 visit by Pope John Paul II. And it is also a good place not only to see the city, but apparently a good place to ask for additional photographs like these young ladies from Korea. So we're coming into Santiago de Compostela. Eventually, after 31 days of relative isolation, where everything occurred at the speed of your feet, we're suddenly drawn into a world of cars and noise again. We've owned the route for weeks. Now the route is cluttered with hustle and bustle. That being said, it seemed to take forever to walk through the city of Santiago to get to the cathedral. On the way, however, I did spot this. This is a unique feature that has the same statement written in most of the languages of Europe. In 1987, the Camino de Santiago was designated the very first European cultural route. 6 years later, the European Union was formed. Many people think that this was more than a coincidence. They feel that the European Union was formed as a result of the Camino de Santiago, with people from different nations coming together, becoming friends, and learning more about each other as they trek together. After following numerous signs, arrows, and scallop shells through the Spanish countryside for almost 4 weeks, actually a little bit more than 4 weeks, it came as a surprise to me to see that the scene in the movie The Way that I had seen, as well as another movie I saw called I'll Push You, both of which I would recommend highly that you watch those movies. They both made it appear that I would enter this plaza and all of a sudden the cathedral would be there in front of me in a very big reveal kind of Hollywood way. I was somewhat confused when I found out that the route actually sneaks up along the side of this 11th century cathedral, and you are unceremoniously emptied into the corner of the plaza. I was initially disappointed to see that the facade was buried in scaffolding and to find that entry was limited to the side doors. But in 2019, the scaffoldings had been moved inside. It was parts of the inside of the cathedral where you could not go. And so in retrospect, with 2020 being shut down completely because of the pandemic, 2021 being available basically only to people from Spain or from the nearby places in Europe, I kind of got over the fact that the scaffolding was there, and I figured, my timing wasn't all that bad anyway. Enjoy the experience when you get there. That's all I can say. You've arrived, you're safe, you've enjoyed the accomplishment. Enjoy those with whom you walked as they finish their Camino. You can celebrate together. Observe others as they enter the same celebratory phase of their experience. Realize you are part of a large fraternity. Those who have challenged themselves to discover the beauty that lies within us all. After you've filled your heart, the next step is to head down to the pilgrim's office down the street, where you will present your pilgrim's passport. Be aware, however, that there will be a waiting line. It took me an hour, maybe even two, to wind my way through the building, chatting with others all along the way, so the time flew, but waiting to receive the Compostela at the end of our journey. Now, we've talked about a lot of places and a lot of things, but if you talk to anyone who has walked the Camino, you will hear the same story over and over, that the story of the Camino is really the people that you meet along the way. Everyone's Camino is different, from the reason that you do the pilgrimage in the first place to the experience that you have along the way. Much of the difference is in the interaction with the other pilgrims that come into and go out of your life as you go along. Like life itself, every person whose path you cross will affect your Camino and your life. They are all different, many speaking different languages, but all leaving an imprint on your soul. These people are very, very special to me. They are my Camino friends. And I will talk afterwards. You will find out that that is detailed in my blog. But the final thing that took place for me was actually the day after I completed the Camino. I went to Mass in a cathedral. The Fumiero over the crowd. Now, this doesn't happen at every Mass. I just happened to hit it perfectly. And for me as a Catholic, this was breathtaking. And so as I watched this thing fly over the heads of the pilgrims, I was reminded that this originally started back in the ancient times as a way to fumigate the crowd, because most of them had been on the trail for over a month without albergues and hotels to stay in to give them a shower. So it was a way of disinfecting the crowd, but it still is an icon of the Camino. So at this point, we have completed the Camino de Santiago. And if anybody has any questions, Lisa,
Yes.
let me know if there are any questions.
There's a few. And Jerry, thank you for a beautiful and inspiring sharing of your journey. So Randy had a comment about different type of electrical plugs in, not to forget that Spain uses a different type of electrical plug. So if you're taking your iPad and need to charge it, or your phone.
Yes. Not only are the plugs different, but the voltage and frequency are different of the electrical grid over there. So if you travel and you take something with you, you have to not only have a plug that will convert from the US configuration to the Spanish configuration, but you have to also have a voltage converter to change to, I believe theirs is 220 volt, 50 hertz. I believe, I'm not certain on that, but you will have to have a converter, and you want to be careful when you buy a adapter in the store, because some of the people in the stores don't realize that the voltages are different. So you have to get one that says it not only will convert the plug, but also the voltage.
Very good. Also, I believe you answered this in the course of the presentation, but Randy was curious about the time of year that you went.
I left, I believe it was the first week in May, and hiked through the month of June. I have friends that have gone in the fall. Both I and they will tell you, don't go in the summer. It can be very hot, especially on the Meseta. There is nothing for shade. So it can be quite a challenge to go in the warm weather. In the cold weather, there aren't enough places to stay warm if the weather turns bad on you all of a sudden. Their weather is very similar to ours. So I would recommend either spring or fall.
Very good. And Tim has a question. You may have addressed some of this already, but recommended footwear and what to pack, and training recommendations.
Okay, a lot of that is dealt with in the guidebook, and I definitely recommend that you not only buy and read the guidebook, but that you take it with you. As far as footwear, when I was backpacking in the mountains, I always wore heavy boots that gave me ankle support. I didn't find that necessary on any part of the Camino, so I would recommend any comfortable walking shoe with a firm sole, so that when you're walking on rocks, you don't feel like you're walking in bare feet. So that would be my recommendation as far as the shoes go. As far as what to take in the pack, give it a lot of thought. I know a lot of people, when they got to Roncesvalles, figured even by that point, after the first day, they figured they weren't going to need many of the things in their pack. They packaged it up and shipped those things back home because they didn't want to carry them. And along that same route, there are services that will transport your bag from one hotel to another if you decide to go that route. So if you're not capable of carrying the weight on your back but still want to walk, there are services that will do that for you.
And training to prepare?
I would recommend going out and walking not far enough to develop blisters, but walking as much as you can comfortably. When I went, because of my limited training early that year, I was getting married and I didn't have a lot of time to go out and do training hikes. I thought that I was going to be hiking about 10 miles a day. So my training hikes were 2, 3, 4 miles long. Once in a while, I would walk 10 miles, just so I continued to tell myself, yes, you can do it. When I got over there, I found out that after the first day, the trekking was easy and it came back to me very quickly. And I ended up averaging about 15 miles a day.
That's great. Great. Well, if there are no further questions, Jerry, I know some of us would like to hear the story that you mentioned about on the mural.
Okay, I will tell the story of Zapatones. His name was Juan Carlos Lima Balsas. He was abandoned as a baby by his parents, and he led a very difficult life. He was a poor student, so he migrated very early in life to working in the vineyards. Later on, committed several robberies and deserted his post while in the military, so he ended up in prison. After his prison time, he decided in 1993 to take a walk on the Camino de Santiago and his own personal pilgrimage of about 35 miles. Now, he didn't walk far enough to get a Compostela, but it was still transformative for him. The experience was just, it struck very deeply And he decided when he got to the Cathedral in Santiago that he would spend the rest of his life dressing in a cape, a hat, and carrying a traditional walking staff like our little animated character here. And daily he would go to the plaza outside the cathedral and greet the people as they completed their Camino. He spent the rest of his life, really, the next 2 decades, every day in the plaza in front of the cathedral, posing for pictures and talking to people about the Camino. He became known as Zapatonus, the eternal pilgrim. And he became a legend, really, among those who had walked the Camino, the government officials, even his former prison guards and the warden became his friends. And he was known around the world. In 2013, he went to a small community to escort a group of pilgrims back to Santiago, and he was hit by a car. He fractured both legs and suffered numerous injuries, of which he never truly recovered. He passed away in 2015, and his death was noted in various news outlets around the world, specifically in Spain, and his death also made the front page of the news in Galicia. So that's the story of Zapatonus.
Wow, very interesting. And I'd like to point out that your current slide has the URL of your blog spot, of
Yes.
your blog. So please be sure and check it out. And once again, Jerry, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And with that said, our participants to look at upcoming classes on NKA Treasure Valley. We have many more interesting classes to offer, and quite a few of them coming up in October. So please be sure your informative learning experience. Thank you, Jerry. And with that, we will close our session. Thank you.
Buen camino.
Buen camino. Adiós.
Bye.